I knew something was off the moment the assistant principal said, "This is a boundaries concern," like I was a dog that needed a leash. He didn't look angry. He looked careful, like he'd already decided I was guilty and just needed the paperwork to match. Then he slid a printout across his desk and I saw my ex's name at the top. We go to the same community college and work on campus. I'm a lab assistant in the science building a few afternoons a week, mostly setting up microscopes and wiping down benches. It's boring, steady, and it pays enough that I don't have to pick up extra shifts at my off-campus job. My ex, Kara, works at the student services desk in the main hall. We dated for about 8 months, split right before finals, and did the usual messy post-breakup dance, awkward smiles, mutual friends acting like referees, and me trying to be polite without looking like I was trying. I thought we were settling into that normal, distant rhythm where you share the same air but not the same life. Apparently, Kara had been telling people I was violating her boundaries at school. The assistant principal, Mr. Hanley, told me there were multiple reports that I was approaching her at her job, showing up in places she couldn't avoid, and trying to pull her into conversations she didn't want. He emphasized impact over intent, in the way administrators do when they're trying to sound gentle while still implying you're a problem. He didn't say harassment, but the room was shaped like that word. I was too stunned to be angry at first. The only time I'd even spoken to Kara in the last month was when she asked if I still had her cardigan. I said no and kept walking. The rest was basic campus life. Passing each other in the hallway, both of us pretending the other person was just another face. I told Mr. Hanley that, calm, measured, the voice I use when I know any hint of emotion will be interpreted as aggression. He nodded like he'd heard that speech before. Event 1 happened the same day. When I got back to the science building, my supervisor texted me, "Hey, can you come by my office?" Quick chat. Quick chat turned into her saying, "I've been asked to remind you to keep things professional on campus." She tried to make it sound neutral, but there was a tightness in her jaw. Like she wasn't scolding me, just checking a box so nobody could accuse her later of ignoring a warning sign. I walked out of her office with that hot, humiliating feeling you get when your reputation has taken damage you didn't even see coming. Event 2 was worse because it was public. 2 days later, I was in line at the coffee kiosk behind the library, headphones on, minding my business. I felt someone step close behind me and assumed it was just the line being cramped. Then I heard Kara's voice, sharp, performative. "Please stop following me." I turned, confused, and she was looking past me at the people in line like she wanted witnesses. Her hands were half raised, not quite defensive, more like, "See what I deal with." My headphones were still around my neck. I hadn't even noticed her walk in. "I'm literally buying coffee," I said, and my voice cracked with disbelief. "I didn't know you were here." She scoffed like I'd made a joke. "You always say that." A guy in a hoodie stared at me like he was trying to decide if he needed to intervene. The barista went stiff. I could feel everyone's attention slide onto my skin. I took my coffee and left without arguing because I knew arguing would look like not respecting her boundaries. But I was shaking all the way back to the lab. In hindsight, that scene was engineered. At the time, it just felt like being mugged in daylight with no way to defend yourself. Event 3 came as an email. Notice of no contact directive, interim. It listed Kara as the complainant and me as the respondent. It told me I wasn't allowed to contact her directly or indirectly, to stay at least 50 feet away from her at all times, and to avoid areas where the complainant is known to work or frequent. That last part was impossible. She worked the student services desk in the main hall. The main hall is where people go for financial aid, ID cards, tutoring, disability services, and half the offices you need to survive as a student. It's also the route between the science building and parking. I read the email 3 times and realized the stakes weren't just social embarrassment. If I violated this, I could lose my campus job or get hit with disciplinary action. All it would take was her saying I was too close. That night I went through every interaction we'd had since the breakup, trying to see what I'd done wrong. I kept landing on the same answer, nothing. I'd been avoiding her so hard I'd started taking the long way around campus. Which is when a tiny detail clicked. The coffee kiosk confrontation happened at 2:05 p.m. I remembered because my lab shift started at 2:30, and I'd checked the time while waiting. Kara's student services shift, according to the schedule a friend once mentioned, ended at 2 o'clock. Why would she be at the kiosk right after her shift ended, on the exact path from my building to my lab? The more I thought about it, the more the pattern looked less like me being careless and more like her placing herself where she could catch me. So I started protecting myself. Not in a dramatic, revenge way. In a, I'm about to get railroaded by a narrative, way. I emailed Mr. Hanley, politely requesting clarification about the 50-foot rule in high-traffic areas and asking for a campus map marking known frequent areas. If I was going to be accused of being too close, I wanted their guidance in writing. Then I did something that felt ridiculous but became my lifeline. I started logging my movements. I turned on location history on my phone. I saved my work punch-in times. I took photos of posted schedules when I could. I asked my lab supervisor to let me start using the side entrance so I could avoid walking past the main hall desk. I also stopped walking alone when I could. If I had to pass through public areas, I went with classmates. Not because I wanted a posse, but because I wanted witnesses who weren't my friends. The big reveal came because Kara got greedy. A week later, I got called back to Mr. Hanley's office. He looked more serious this time. He said there was a new allegation. Kara reported that I'd stood near her desk for several minutes the previous afternoon, staring, and that she felt unsafe. He slid another paper toward me. It was her statement, typed up. I almost laughed, which would have been a terrible idea, because at that exact time I was in the lab running a tutoring session. I knew it because it was the day we had an equipment delivery and the shipping guy had flirted with my supervisor in front of all of us. It was memorable. I said, "Can I show you something?" Mr. Hanley hesitated, like he expected me to pull out some unhinged manifesto. I opened my phone and pulled up my timecard. Clocked in at 1:58 p.m. Clocked out at 6:03 p.m. I showed him a photo my classmate had posted in our group chat at 3:12 p.m. A picture of our lab table covered in worksheets, with my hand visible holding a marker. I pulled up my location history, which showed me in the science building the entire time. Then I said the sentence that changed the air in the room. If Kara says I was at her desk at 3 o'clock, either she's mistaken, or someone is making reports that aren't true. Mr. Hanley's face tightened, not angry, concerned, like the paperwork was starting to wobble. He asked, "Do you have anything else?" I did. I'd requested security camera footage for my route after the coffee kiosk incident, not because I thought it would clear me. There was nothing to clear, but because I wanted to see if I was crazy. The campus security office had told me they couldn't release footage to students directly, but they could review it internally if it was relevant to a complaint. So I said, "There are cameras at the kiosk and in the hallway. If the concern is me following her, you should look at who arrived first." That was the moment I saw Mr. Hanley stop treating me like a potential problem and start treating me like a person who might be getting set up. A few days later, he emailed me asking to come in again. This time, he didn't slide papers across the desk like evidence. He spoke carefully, with that administrative neutral tone, but there was an edge of apology under it. He said their review found inconsistencies in the timeline of Kara's reports. The camera review confirmed that at the coffee kiosk, I entered first and stood in line looking at my phone, and Kara walked in afterward, looked around, and then positioned herself behind me. It also showed that when she said, "Stop following me," several people turned, and she angled her body to make sure they could see her face. In other words, it looked staged. Mr. Hanley told me the interim no contact would remain in place, out of caution, but the narrative had changed. They were now investigating whether the complaint process was being misused. Kara didn't get expelled or anything dramatic. Real life rarely gives you that kind of neat ending. But the consequences were real. Her supervisor was notified. She was moved off the student services front desk to back office work, temporarily. Mutual friends stopped giving me those loaded, pitying looks. One guy who'd been cold to me for weeks finally said, "Hey, sorry." I didn't know what to think. The best part wasn't watching Kara lose access to a stage. It was walking across campus and no longer feeling like any random corner could become a courtroom. The last time I saw her, she passed me outside the main hall and kept her eyes forward like I was the one who didn't exist. I used to think boundaries were about what you ask for and what you respect. Now I understand they can also be a weapon if nobody checks who's holding it. And I learned the only thing louder than an accusation is a calm timeline that doesn't budge.